Hi there, I'm Kevin Falcone. You can all, okay, I can hear myself bouncing. All right, I'm from Best Practical Solutions. We're the people who write RT. As a result, we have slowly taken over running two of the community RTs that exist, RT.cpan and RT.perl. I'm going to talk briefly about how those two work, some upgrade work that we're doing on them this summer, so things to look forward in the future, a couple of the outstanding dev requests for them, and one of the other big things is how to get a hold of us if you're one of the users of these systems and you want to file a bug, ask for a request, that sort of thing. At Best Practical, I am too many different things, but primarily relevant here is that I'm one of the developers of RT, I'm one of the software guys. I also do a lot of training and a lot of consulting, so I'm happy to answer any RT specific questions and any RT.cpan or RT.perl specific questions as we go along. I'm going to start with RT.cpan. The most relevant thing here is that RT.cpan came about because back in about 2001-ish, like mid-2001, Jesse Vincent, who's the owner of Best Practical, and Jesse says hi, he wishes he could be here, but he was out in San Francisco running laser cutters, building keyboards, but he does miss YAPC. He was trying to file tickets, and this was back in the days when we were still using CVS. We occasionally, maybe you had Subversion, maybe there was SourceForge, but there was no real good way. We had CPAN was great, it existed, you could pull things off of it for years at that point, but there was no standard way of submitting your bug reports. Some of them said, please send mail to the author. Some of them were yelling into the dark of night. Some of them were just, people would be angry when you sent them a bug report because you'd filed a bug against their module. And one of the other problems was if you had a bug, there was no real good way to Google your bug and say, oh, someone else had this problem. Oh, and they have a patch. Oh, that's great. And Jesse realized, well, I've been writing a Bugtracker for the last couple of years, and maybe I could spin one up for the community. And that's how RT.cpan came into being. He, basically bothered Andreas and got a copy of the pause database and used that to build out basically one queue per distribution on CPAN, and in order to do auth for people to log in. And for a number of years, we ran that on actually the Best Practical infrastructure. When I was hired by Best Practical, it was actually more than half of the resources on our primary server went to running rt.cpan.org. These days, it runs on a VM. I don't actually have a good picture of Esk and Robert together. I have a good picture of Robert, but I have no good pictures of Esk, so I'm just going to steal their icons instead. For about 3 or 4 years now, we've run on their infrastructure. It's been great because I've been able to be less of a systems administrator and less of keeping things up. Generally, rule of thumb, if perl.org is down, or if pause.perl.org, if any of those other things are down, there's not much I can do about it because I'm just sort of one of their VMs. If specifically RT.cpan is down or RT.perl is down alone, then it's probably my fault. But if it's all of the things that run on perl.org infrastructure, it's Robert's fault, and you're going to have to wait for him to wake up, just like I have to wait for him to wake up. These days, basically the way it works is perl.org contributes resources to run it. Best Practical contributes a couple of people to run the systems and to do development and to handle bugs and to make sure it keeps running. 85% of the time on RT.cpan, that's going to be me. 15% or 20% of the time, it's going to be Alex. At some point, it may end up being Wallace. We'll see if he gets suckered into it. But basically, there's a couple of people who have root on the boxes and access to the databases, but also just general RT knowledge. Although, a lot of times, it's not general RT knowledge. It's knowledge of like pause and everything else involved in RT.cpan. As of when I checked over the weekend, there are about just short of 34,000 queues in RT.cpan. This is why you'll never see a list of the queues in RT.cpan. We've gone around and ripped them all out because there's often a drop-down box in RT instances of queues, and as you can imagine, your browser might freak out if we gave you one of those. This is why it's now one of the big major things that happened last summer when Tom Sibley did an upgrade was you got autocompleters in a lot of places to help you do a lot of things actually based off of meta-cpan. Looks like roughly, we've been pretty consistently, there's about 10,000 tickets a year reported across all the queues, which is actually a very small RT instance. Although it feels like a big RT instance some days, this is actually, when I go look at the statistics, quite small. Most important thing, most common question that I answer about RT.cpan, and this is the thing that I tend to do in #toolchain, is, okay, the permissions are wrong in RT.cpan, or something hasn't shown up in RT.cpan, et cetera, et cetera. This is the program that does all of the magic. It's called cpan to RT. Now we run it every 2 hours. For a number of years, it used to run every night because it took about an hour and a half to run, and it murdered the machine that was running on. So we fixed that a couple of years ago. It's much later now. It no longer runs against the PAWS MySQL database. For a number of years ago, it's basically we run against all of the same publicly available data that you guys have access to. So that means, findls.gz and O2 packages details, which are just, they're on every CPAN server, they're on every PAWS instance. These two files we end up using. This is where we get our list of distributions. And there's a whole thing that I'm probably not going to explain as well as I could about files versus distributions on PAWS. You basically if you have 50 Perl modules in a bundle, the name of that bundle is your distribution. That's what we're going to use in rt.cpan. This does occasionally cause problems when Ingi releases 6 things and he changes the name of the module 7 times, and I have to scurry around behind him closing the first 4 of them or something for him because he couldn't quite make up his mind, or he wrote his own version of Dacilla to release to CPAN and it was slightly wrong or something. And those are the sorts of things that please email. There's an email address a couple slides down the line. Please email us when you see that sort of thing, because I just want to make it easier for you to find the right queue. The other one that's really good is CGI.pm versus CGI. I believe CGI.pm is the historical one that hasn't been the right one to use in a number of years, and CGI is the correct one. So we've tried to make this as obvious as possible, but it doesn't always work. These are also the things where we get those broken in and fixed in custom fields to pull lists of what are the relevant versions. Other really common question, we use whois.xml to pull your rt.cpan username, pull a real name for you, and pull an email address if it's public. So my email address is in that whois.xml. It's in there as cpan@jibsheet.com. That's my published address. A lot of people, you can choose to have a private email address on PAWS. We will just send mail to your user ID at cpan.org and let them figure out how to get you the mail. Of course, if you've told PAWS that you don't have an email address, then you will never get mail from RT. You can go into RT and change this. We won't overwrite it after we create your user, but I think last time I checked, there's something like 85 or 90% of the people just have either the thing that's in their PAWS identity, or they have blah 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 at cpan.org as their email, so that it all just forwards along. Then probably the other most relevant thing is 06 perms. We don't actually care what kind of permissions you have on a module. We just care that you have some sort of permissions on a module. This came up recently because PAWS may add another kind of permission in a year or two after one of the QA hackathons. And we basically just look at it and say, oh, you have permissions on CGI? Great, okay, fine. We will make you an admin CC of that queue. Relevant sort of digression there. You'll see if you're navigating around in RT.cpan, you've got requesters, you've got CCs, you've got admin CCs. Admin CCs are the maintainers and co-maintainers. They're the administrative CCs. You pick up a bunch of extra rights. You can close tickets, you can delete tickets, you can, often if you have rights on things, you can move things between queues. You can basically do more with a ticket if you're one of the people who maintains tickets in a queue. If you're just a requester or a CC, I think you can close your own tickets now, but primarily you're just there so you'll get mail when somebody replies to the ticket saying, I fixed your bug in the blah, 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 or when they write back to you saying, can you explain your bug using more words, please? That sort of thing. For the purposes of rt.cpan, requesters and CCs are basically equivalent. In our normal RT, we do differentiate them a lot, and we do a lot of different things with them, but for our CPAN, it's mostly just a way to send an email bomb out to people when you want to know more information. With the current version of RT.cpan that's running now and the next one, there's actually a lot easier if you go into the people page on a ticket to go in and say, find all the people that were related to a ticket and have written it on a ticket over the history of it and add them to the ticket, which is great. And also when you're replying to a ticket from the web interface, you get a much nicer interface for ticking one time people into that reply. This also brings up a trick that I know some people know, but not everyone, which is you can be given co-maint on one file in a distribution, and you'll pick up rt.cpan rights for the distribution. This apparently is a commonly used trick that I did not know existed until about 4 months ago. Totally works, totally accepted. It appears to be an MST trick that I just learned about. RT.cpan allows 2 ways to open tickets. You can use the web UI. You can't do them purely in the public interface. You do have to be signed in with some identifying information. We currently we'll take your PAWS ID. David Golden has sent us over the years repeatedly stronger language saying, please don't ask for a pause ID just to report bugs. You can use Bitcard, you can use OpenID to log in and do it. We've also bulked up the documentation on how to send an email. And I mean, this is just sort of the general thing is bug dash whatever the distribution name is with colons replaced with dashes at rt.cpan.org. So one of my modules, RT10 external auth. And one thing that I will note here, OpenID is a bit wonky with the Google OpenID because their OpenID isn't really OpenID. But lots of other people do use OpenID. We probably should support some more auth options and can support some more auth options. We just don't know.
Evil.
Probably the two most relevant ones on here actually are like the sign in with Gmail, and I'm told the Twitter OAuth will give me an email address. So I unfortunately know too many Twitter devs, so they pushed me for that one. But yes, like we could go this way, but that seems wrong. It's more likely to be Perl.org, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides, and it would vaguely like some different auth options. And so whatever we go with for Perl.org, I'll just install on both of them, and we'll use it in both places. One thing, when you do open a ticket, we do try and like write out as much information as we can about people to like say, please do a good job. Tell me what Perl you're in. Tell me blah, blah, blah. Be polite. I did notice when I was taking the screenshot last night, probably the most common bug that my coworker fixes, because I'm just tired of fixing it, is, hi, I emailed into your Bugtracker and it's got my phone number and my home address and a picture of my child in the signature. Could you go delete that for me? And I always just want to say, come on, man, it's a public Bugtracker. Did you not? And I realize that we say it in most of the places, but we don't say it here. So we go and we delete those and we trim them out. But unfortunately, it's already been Google indexed, so it's probably out there on the web at this point. But yeah, it's a weekly occurrence. So I keep trying to go around. If you find somewhere else that doesn't say public, or if you disagree with this language in some way, please file a bug. We're happy to. Language patches are easy for me to take and integrate for you. Code patches are harder. So yeah, auth, blah blah blah. Email. So if somebody writes into bug-rtauth external auth at rt.cpan.org, if you're a maintainer or a co-maint on the module, you'll get mail about the bug. You can just reply to that mail, and it will go back to the requesters, and then they can reply. So you can basically never log into rt.cpan.org and be able to work back and forth on your bug. You can, and we'll talk about the WebView in a sec, but I mean, I certainly do 95% of my RT. I'm an RT developer, and I still almost never use the WebUI in RT. I still do 90% of what I do in email, and then go back at the end. I really do mean this, by the way. Like, this comes up every now and then, but both rt.cpan and rt.perl's mail is fascinating and is a bunch of QMail. Very, very briefly, does anyone know what QP-SMTPD is?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so that's about what I expected. Yes, so
It's their third queue.
Oh right, that one's public. I always forget that one is visible to you guys, right? Because there's like 20 queues in Perl.org that you can't see, and then that one is public, right? So QP-SMTP is a QMail front-end thing written by Bjorn Hansen, and it runs on the front end of a bunch of the Perl.org servers. So it's the thing that gets your mail when you send this mail. It then sends that mail to us over at Best Practical, where we then store it in one of our mail queues. Then we run it through like a giant Perl script, which then runs it through the mail gateway, which then injects it and is done. And as complicated as that is, it's actually worse when we talk about the rt.perl.org mail. But so there's people occasionally ask about mail. Like, I only control about half of the mail stream for rt.cpan.org, but it does work. I mean, for the most part, I can count on one hand the number of mail problems we've had with rt.cpan over the years. When you're managing tickets, you basically have the two options. You can click around the web UI. There's an actions menu up in the top right corner that lets you do most of the things. You can reply, you can comment, you can resolve, you can delete, etc. A lot of other folks either don't know, but there is a command line client. It ships with RT, but we have it bundled up in case you aren't installing a full RT. This CPAN package, RT Client CLI, will get you the current release of BinRT, which is actually like a 4.2 release, but it works just fine on rt.cpan. It's actually how I do a lot of things. I will end up replying to a bunch of tickets, and then at the end I will just use the RT command line client to say, reject all of those tickets, or resolve all of those tickets, or edit a couple of other things. And it has its own built-in help. It uses the REST interface that RT provides, but I'm not going to talk about that. Briefly, managing queues, some of this is Sean's fault, some of it's been added on later. If you're a maintainer or a co-main, you get a couple of boxes on the manage tag in your queue. You can write up a bunch of notes, which will show up at the top of every distribution page when you're creating tickets. You can email other people, so like the Win32 bug queue mails the Win32 list. This is how they do it. And you can also add more tags to things to have them, to make it easier to see things. So the distribution notes show up anytime you're like looking at the top of a page or looking at anything else. You get a note saying, the helpful things, but you also get, people will write out, when you report this bug, please make sure that you tell me the version of the library you're building against. It's basically extra information you would really appreciate when handling a bug report. You don't want to use rt.cpan.org. Shadowcat sponsored development. Ian Norton wrote it. We will take out of your meta.yaml bugtracker.email or bugtracker.web, and we will put notes all over rt.cpan saying, please go over there and report this bug. So anytime you see a distribution with this set up, you'll see, please visit the preferred bug tracker. 90% of these are just links over to GitHub's issues thing, but other things are custom, please only email me, that sort of thing. It ends up looking something like that in XGL's MakeMaker. I missed a caret, sorry. And there's a bunch of other things. We do keep the alternate bug tracker. We do keep the queue around because it may have 10 years worth of tickets in it that are in Google, and people will find the patches for their old version of a module they need, and that's super helpful for folks. Other things you can do. This is how our MetaCpan and Search.cpan get their list of open bugs on RT.cpan. So if you want to stare at the information, you can. And similarly, I think Neil B was the one who asked us for the SQLite data, which is a dump of a bunch of ticket metadata. There's not currently really any requests in for RT.cpan for features. So now is the time that if you would like a feature on RT.cpan, you should email this email address and ask about it. Because I have a list for rt.prol.org. I don't have a list for rt.cpan. So rt.cpan this summer is probably just going to get a straightforward upgrade, and maybe I'll add a few things. But that's the right place if you'd like to know. By the way, this one, if I don't know your name, please tell me your Paul's ID because I can't guess it. Just like half the things where I write in because I don't know how to check on things. Prol.org. In the beginning, there was Prolbug. If you are lucky enough to be far enough back in perl5.git to be looking at Prolbug numbers, this file exists. It is the mapping between those old numbers and the RT tickets that represent those things. I think this is like Nicholas Clark is probably the only person who uses this file, but there's probably 5 other people that use it. It's there, it's linked if you need it. The rest of the actual bugs date from pre-2000 in rt.prol.org. For a long time, this was run by Robert Spear, Robert of Perl.org. Basically, I rebuilt it from scratch in 2011. In 2012, he convinced me to take over maintainership of it. And in 2013, I spent way too long finishing an upgrade from a very old version of RT to the current version of RT. This is why sometimes when you ask me why, I don't know, because it was done 10 years ago by Robert, and I have to go ask him. The biggest thing in here are that you will see if you're, Perl 5 and Perl 6 are in there. There's the QPSMTP queue, which I always forget about. And I always forget that like the perlmongers.org group management is in there as well as some other things. And by the way, if there's anyone who wants to be the Perl 6 community liaison for me, I don't even know who I should be asking questions of for that. Because I have questions about how their queue should be run, and I don't know who that would be. I'm going to skip over mail. But upgrades that I'm working on, biggest thing that you will get is RT 4.2 has native MySQL full text search support rather than bolted on full text search support, so we'll enable it once we finish the upgrade. The linking between tickets, mostly for people handling Meta 5.21 releases, 5.22 releases, now autocompletes, so you don't have to remember or copy and paste bug IDs all around. You can actually search for them. And we'll see if user summaries are useful to you guys. I'll send mail to P5P when I get there. Most requested things that I know for Perl.org. We deployed this one. There's about 5 or 6 people who now have a lot more privileges for deleting spam. I also have a bunch of dev I'd like to do for the spam handling on rt.prol.org, but I've not had time. I am in the process of building a dashboard for you guys to use to look at tickets that will make the meta tracking better. Rather than having that one long list on the side of meta tickets for releases, you can have a much better thing to look at. I didn't even realize it was a pain point until I was talking to Rick a couple of weeks ago, and I said, oh, there's easy solutions for that. And I'm in the process of building it out, and I'll hand it over. Bleed break CPAN has been requested. Basically, anytime a ticket comes in, link it. I have code. And now I have a dev instance that I can test the code on. And once it tests, we'll just make that silently work. The other thing that's been requested is being able to file bugs online. As far as I know, this actually works now, but I've not really tested it, and I would really like there to be more directions, like saying what to include in a bug report online before you roll it out. But as far as I know, since the upgrade, I accidentally made that work and then never fixed it to stop working again. No, literally, that's what happened. Somebody's like, wow, I can submit bugs online. Yeah, of course you can. And then I found out that they'd turned that off years ago. I have 2 things sitting on P5P right now from last week. A reply to Carl about pending release. So if anybody else has opinions on pending release, please reply to that. And also, the auto reply and the on-resolve mail that goes out are relatively generic. I've forwarded along that text. If you have opinions on how that text should read, let me know. Otherwise, in like a week or 2, I'm going to buy Fiat, clean it up a little bit, but I'm not going to do terribly much to it. I was worried I would get an argument about it, but I actually got ignored, which I guess is better than an argument, but we will see. Reporting bugs, probugadmin@rt.perl.org. Biggest thing you can tell me is who you're logged in as, like what it says with logged in as blah, blah, blah at the top of the page. Reproduction steps and politeness. I really shouldn't have to say that one, but there are a couple of folks who are just shockingly rude to the Perl.org staff. Other things if you need me. So I'm jibsheet on IRC. I hang out in RT, which is the general RT help channel. I'm also in P5P, although I don't read it all the time, but if I see something about the RT go past, I usually try to comment. I do read P5P itself, but I can't keep up most of the time. I'm also in toolchain, but it helps if you nick highlight me, and I'm happy to try and help if I have time. Those are the 2 bug reporting things for RT.cpan and for RT.perl.org. I have blog bits on log.perl.org, so I blog things that I fix so that I change there if you want to see things as they go. I've also been encouraged to send more mail to P5P, so I'm going to start doing that so that people see when things change. I'm 2 minutes over, so if you have questions, I'll answer them. And then otherwise, I'm around for 4 hours. If you have any questions or any personal requests, or you'd like to apply pressure for your favorite feature, I'll be here till about 4. Thank you for listening.